remember the exact moment I realized just how invisible I had always been in my family's eyes. I had walked into the living room that afternoon, expecting the usual polite nods and lukewarm conversation, but instead, I was greeted with laughter, champagne popping, and a level of excitement that seemed almost theatrical. My brother stood in the center, grinning ear to ear, holding a set of keys with a car-shaped keychain dangling from his fingers. My parents hovered nearby, their faces glowing with pride, and it hit me like a physical blow. They had given him a brand new Tesla. Not just any car, but the kind that screamed success and power, the kind I had only ever seen in magazines or on TV. And as if that weren't enough, they announced that he now had a $75 million inheritance and a mansion waiting for him, complete, with the manicured lawns and marble floors I had only dreamt about. I felt my chest tighten, a mix of disbelief and burning humiliation. Every laugh, every congratulatory hug, every "we're so proud" directed at him felt like a silent accusation against me. I had spent years quietly sacrificing, helping, and proving myself, yet here I stood, unnoticed and dismissed. The resentment started simmering almost immediately, a slow, hot burn that spread through me like wildfire. I recalled every birthday I had spent alone, every accomplishment brushed off, every effort that had gone unseen while he was celebrated for simply existing. The contrast was unbearable. They had always favored him, always had. And now the evidence was impossible to ignore. My mind replayed every past slight. The forgotten school awards, the ignored promotions, the subtle remarks that reminded me I was never enough. I wanted to yell, to throw something, to shake them awake to see what they had done to me, but I stayed frozen, my face a mask of calm while my heart thundered. I couldn't help but notice how easily my brother accepted their attention, how natural it was for him to bask in their admiration. And I, despite my accomplishments and efforts, was relegated to the shadows, a silent observer to their favoritism. A wave of humiliation rolled over me, and I realized that this wasn't just about the money or the car or the mansion. It was about everything I had been denied. Every instance of neglect and dismissal crystallized into this one moment. I felt a bitter mixture of jealousy and sorrow, the sting of invisibility amplified by their ostentatious celebration. And yet, somewhere deep down, beneath the anger and hurt, a quiet determination began to grow. I wasn't going to stay invisible, forever. This moment, as painful as it was, lit a fire in me. The recognition of their favoritism, their blindness to my worth, had awakened something I couldn't ignore. I clenched my fists subtly at my sides, feeling the cold metal of the table against my fingers, and I knew, with a clarity I hadn't felt before, that my story wasn't over, not by a long shot. I couldn't stop the questions spinning in my head, each one sharper than the last. Why him? Why always him? Had I done something wrong? Or was it just that I was never meant to matter? The laughter from the living room felt like needles pressing into my chest, and every congratulations my brother received twisted the knife a little deeper. I replayed the years in my mind, each memory a reminder of how I had been invisible while he was celebrated. I remembered staying up late to help him with school projects, only to have my own achievements dismissed as trivial. I had skipped vacations, worked weekends, and quietly supported family endeavors that benefited him, all without a single acknowledgement. And now, here he was, gifted beyond imagination, while I stood in the shadows, a ghost in my own home. The resentment bubbled beneath the surface, tangled with a creeping sense of self-doubt. Had I done enough? Was I too demanding? Had my efforts really meant nothing? My thoughts flickered through dozens of moments. The graduation where my valedictory speech was overlooked, the promotion I had earned but never celebrated, the countless birthdays and holidays where my presence seemed optional. Each recollection carried a sting of neglect, a proof of how expendable I had been in their eyes. I felt a surge of anger mixed with deep sorrow. How had it come to this? that my worth was measured by applause I would never hear, I tried to tell myself to be rational, to swallow the bitterness, but it was impossible. My heart pounded as I replayed the way my parents had smiled at him, the way they hung on every word, the way they overlooked my existence like I had been a shadow cast behind him. I remembered the times I had covered for his mistakes, defended him in arguments, and quietly borne the consequences of their favoritism, thinking somehow it would earn me respect. Instead, it had only solidified my role as the unremarkable sibling, the one who could be ignored without consequence. The room around me seemed smaller, heavier, as if the walls themselves were judging me, reminding me of my place. I clenched, my hands in my pockets, feeling the nails dig into my palms, and I realized that I didn't want to be part of their celebration anymore. I didn't want to witness another instance of their favoritism, another display of wealth and power being handed to someone who had never truly earned it, or so it felt to me. My mind raced, planning my silent retreat, imagining the cool air. Outside, the relief of stepping away from the suffocating weight of their approval and expectations. Without saying a word, I turned and walked toward the front door, every step fueled by a mix of anger and sorrow. I didn't look back as the laughter and chatter continued behind me. My chest still ached, my jaw clenched, but a quiet fire burned in my gut, the beginnings of something that refused to be extinguished. The world inside that house had rejected me, humiliated me, and overlooked me, but stepping out, I felt a sliver of control return. I could feel the simmering anger curling in my stomach, sharp and potent, a promise that this was far from over. I had barely stepped onto the driveway when it happened. A small stumble over an uneven stone, nothing serious, but enough to make me curse under my breath. That's when I noticed him. A man I'd never seen before, standing casually near the eye, hedges, hands tucked into his coat pockets, his eyes fixed on me with an intensity that made my skin prickle. For a moment, I thought he was just another passer-by, maybe a delivery man, but the way he held himself, the careful timing of his approach, told me this was no ordinary stranger. He didn't introduce himself, didn't ask questions. Instead, he simply extended a plain manila envelope toward me, as if the contents were more important than words. I froze, unsure whether to take it or walk away, my heart hammering with curiosity and unease. What is this?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly. He didn't answer directly. Instead, he leaned closer, lowering his voice to a near whisper, yet somehow carrying a weight that made me listen. "Open it," he said slowly, deliberately. "But be ready. This changes everything." The ambiguity of his statement sent a shiver down my spine. What could possibly lie inside? Was it good news, bad news, or something that would shatter whatever little piece I had left? My hand hovered over the envelope, fingers brushing the smooth paper, feeling the faint rigidity of something tucked within. I thought of my brother, the mansion, the Tesla, the absurd $75 million, and a strange mix of anger and hope surged inside me. Could this stranger have seen through my despair? Did he know I had been ignored, overlooked, humiliated? Was this some kind of reckoning or opportunity I wasn't ready to comprehend? The wind whispered through the trees, carrying the faint sounds of the ongoing celebration inside the house. Laughter, clinking glasses, voices oblivious to the storm raging inside me. I glanced back at the estate, the bright lights, the perfect lawn, the symbol of everything I had been denied. Then I looked at the envelope again, feeling an inexplicable pull, a combination of fear and longing that made my pulse quicken. The stranger gave me one last measured look, a slight nod that seemed to confirm everything without saying a word. And just like that, he stepped back, fading into the shadows near the hedge, leaving me alone with the envelope in my hands and a sense of anticipation so thick it pressed against my chest. I held it there, staring at it as if it might answer all the questions swirling in my mind, but of course, it said nothing. Only the faint weight inside promised that this small piece of paper could alter the trajectory of my life. Perhaps forever. My stomach tightened. My curiosity fought with caution. And I knew that once I opened it, nothing would ever be the same. My fingers trembled as I carefully tore open the envelope, the paper crackling louder than I expected in the quiet driveway. Inside were several neatly folded documents, official-looking, stamped and signed, each one heavier with implication than the last. I unfolded the first sheet and froze. It was a legal statement confirming that I was the beneficiary of a set of previously undisclosed financial accounts that my parents had never mentioned, hidden away for reasons I couldn't yet understand. My heart skipped, then sank, then began to race. How had I not known? All those years of being ignored. And yet here was proof that I had been quietly endowed with resources I hadn't even imagined. The next page revealed something even more shocking. Shares in one of the family's private businesses, enough to grant me influence I had never dreamed of wielding. The realization hit me in waves, shock first, disbelief next, then a strange, almost dizzying sense of hope. Every memory of being overlooked, dismissed, or humiliated seemed to shift slightly, replaced by the tantalizing possibility that perhaps I could finally claim a measure of the respect I had been denied. My pulse quickened as I considered the implications. Control, leverage, a way to assert my presence where it had been forbidden before. The final document was the most cryptic, a legal authorization allowing me to act on behalf of certain dormant family trusts, with the discretion to influence decisions, investments, and even minor business operations. Suddenly the pieces clicked. This wasn't just an opportunity, it was a weapon. A tool I could use to even the scales that had always been so heavily tilted against me. I felt a shiver of power crawl up my spine, mingling with lingering anger and humiliation. Could it really be this simple? Could this be the way I finally reclaimed agency over my life? The first tangible step toward justice for years of neglect? I paused to breathe, the envelope now resting on my lap, and let the weight of the revelation settle in. The world outside the driveway faded. The distant laughter from inside the estate seemed distant and irrelevant. I pictured my brother, smug and oblivious, and a dark thrill ran through me, sharp and undeniable. It wasn't just hope I felt, it was possibility. The kind that demanded careful planning and patience. The kind that could rewrite the story that had always favored him. Every instinct screamed caution. Yet another part of me, the part that had endured years of invisibility, urged action. For the first time in as long as I could remember, I didn't feel powerless. I felt dangerous, and in that danger lay freedom. The envelope, once a simple piece of paper, had become a portal into a world where I could finally assert myself, where my voice, my worth, and my desires might finally command attention. My chest tightened with a mixture of fear and exhilaration, and I knew that nothing would ever feel the same again. I had the means, the leverage, the path forward, and now all I needed was the courage to take the first step. I spent the rest of the evening tucked away in my small study. The envelope and its contents spread across the desk, like pieces of a puzzle I was both terrified and eager to solve. My mind raced, replaying old memories alongside the possibilities now laid bare before me. I remembered nights spent trying to please my parents, covering for my brother's mistakes, swallowing my pride while he thrived effortlessly. I had been invisible, trapped in a cycle of giving without recognition, of sacrifice without reward. And now, juxtaposed against those years of helplessness, the documents in front of me were a revelation, a stark contrast that made my blood burn with equal parts anger and excitement. I knew I couldn't move recklessly. This was too important, too delicate to risk exposure. Every step had to be calculated. I jotted notes, drawing lines between accounts, business shares, and legal leverage, imagining ways I could reclaim what had been denied to me for decades. Each line I wrote felt like a tiny spark, igniting a growing fire of purpose. I envisioned my brother, so arrogant and unaware, suddenly facing consequences he could never have anticipated. The thought made a low hum of satisfaction rise in my chest. I decided I needed guidance, someone I could trust completely. By late evening, I called Mara, my oldest friend and confidant, who had always been a calm, analytical presence in my chaotic life. Over the phone, I outlined the situation in cautious, measured words, careful to conceal the full scale of my plans. Mara listened, asking pointed questions, challenging my assumptions, and helping me see angles I hadn't considered. Our conversation was intense but grounding, each suggestion and counterpoint sharpening my strategy. I felt my resolve harden with every exchange, as though I were slowly shedding the weight of years of invisibility. As the night deepened, I stood by the window, looking out at the estate just beyond the trees. The lights glimmered, oblivious to the storm that was quietly brewing. My mind replayed the contrast between my past helplessness and the opportunity now in my hands, and the difference was staggering. The fear that had once dominated me had transformed into a careful, simmering confidence. I could see the contours of the plan forming, each step deliberate, each move calculated to reclaim what I deserved. Finally, I placed the documents back in the envelope, my fingers lingering over the edges as if they contained not just papers, but the promise of vindication. My gaze hardened, a small smile tugging at the corners of my lips. Tomorrow, everything changes. The next morning, I found myself back at the family estate, this time under the guise of casual presence rather than an invisible observer. My brother, still smug from the previous day's celebrations, barely noticed me at first, but I carried myself differently, a quiet confidence that drew subtle attention. I had spent hours planning, and now even a small gesture could carry weight. When the family accountant arrived with documents for a minor investment decision, I spoke up before anyone else could, my voice calm but firm. "I think we need to reconsider this allocation," I said, glancing at the numbers and pointing out inconsistencies no one had caught. The room froze for a moment. My parents' eyes widened, a flicker of surprise crossing their faces. My brother stammered, clearly unprepared for me to speak with authority. I continued, laying out my reasoning logically yet assertively, watching them shift uneasily as I guided the discussion to a safer, more profitable alternative. The satisfaction was subtle but intoxicating, the first tangible result of the leverage I now held. Inside, I felt a rush of empowerment unlike anything I had experienced before. For years, I had been silenced, overlooked, dismissed, and yet here I was, steering the room, my words carrying weight, my presence undeniable. Each nod of agreement, each acknowledgement, felt like a quiet victory against decades of neglect. I could see the recognition in their expressions, the fleeting awareness that perhaps I had always deserved to be heard. My brother, for the first time, seemed unsettled. The arrogance that had defined him wavered, replaced by confusion and a hint of unease. It was small, but it was mine, a symbolic act, a taste of the reversal I had been craving. I felt the simmering anger of the past days transform into controlled power, a strategic patience that promised bigger victories ahead. By the time the meeting ended, I walked away with my head held high, aware that I had shifted the dynamic, even if only slightly. The envelope, the documents, the late-night planning, they were beginning to yield results. And deep down, I relished the knowledge that this was only the beginning. The fire inside me had been kindled, and no one could ignore it now. Just when I thought I had everything meticulously mapped out, the first real obstacle hit, sudden and unrelenting. My father, always sharp but usually distracted, had begun asking questions about the documents I had quietly obtained. His tone wasn't overtly hostile, but the subtle scrutiny in his eyes made my stomach churn. Every carefully laid plan felt exposed under his gaze, and the thought that my secret might unravel sent a cold spike of fear through me. My brother, oblivious at first, began to notice the tension too, glancing at me with curiosity that quickly shifted into suspicion. I could see it in the twitch of his jaw, the narrowing of his eyes. The carefully constructed illusion of my quiet control was starting to wobble. Complicating matters further, one of the legal documents revealed a clause I had initially overlooked, something that could be challenged if scrutinized too closely. My confidence wavered as I imagined lawyers poring over the text, finding a technicality that could nullify everything I was preparing. For the first time since discovering the envelope, the weight of potential failure pressed on me, heavy and suffocating. I paced the room, my mind a whirlwind of fear, anger, and self-recrimination. Had I miscalculated? Was I too bold, too impatient? The years of humiliation I had endured suddenly felt amplified by the looming possibility of collapse. Memories flashed unbidden. The countless times my efforts had been ignored. The moments when I had been powerless to influence anything despite my competence and dedication. Each recollection cut deeper now, not as nostalgia, but as a reminder of stakes that felt higher than ever. My chest tightened, and a low, simmering rage began to mingle with the fear. I wouldn't fail. Not now. Not when the first taste of victory had felt so intoxicating. I retreated to a quiet corner, scanning the documents once more, searching for a loophole, a missed opportunity, anything that could restore control. My hands shook slightly, but my mind sharpened, adrenaline mixing with anxiety to force clarity. I realized that to survive this, I couldn't simply react. I needed to anticipate, to counter, to take bold, precise action that would throw them off balance. The fire of determination reignited, hotter and more focused than before, tempered by the awareness that this misstep could be dangerous if mishandled. As I looked toward the family estate through the window, the lights glowing in oblivious celebration, I allowed myself a grim smile. They thought they had me figured out. They had no idea what was coming next. No inkling that I had already begun to conceive a countermeasure far more daring than anything they could anticipate. Tomorrow the game would change, and this time I would dictate the terms. I knew I couldn't navigate this alone. The stakes were too high, the scrutiny too sharp, and any misstep could unravel everything I had painstakingly planned. That's why I reached out to Lara, a trusted legal consultant who had quietly advised me during past family disputes, and to Nathan, a business partner with an uncanny ability to spot vulnerabilities in corporate structures. Meeting them separately, I laid out the situation cautiously, careful to reveal just enough to convey the gravity without tipping my hand to anyone else. Over coffee with Lara, I spread the documents across the table, watching her eyes widen as she scanned each page. "This is powerful," she said, her voice low, deliberate. "But it's delicate. One wrong move, and they could challenge everything." I nodded, absorbing her caution while noting the subtle excitement in her tone. The validation of someone so sharp, someone who could foresee potential pitfalls, gave me a surge of confidence. Later, Nathan and I reviewed the business shares, identifying points where my influence could subtly shift outcomes in my favor. "If we time this correctly," he said, leaning forward, "you could turn a minor adjustment into a public statement of authority without raising suspicion until it's too late." His enthusiasm was contagious, a spark that set my own strategy alight. I realized that with their guidance, the theoretical power I'd glimpsed in the envelope was now tangible and actionable. Dialogue flowed back and forth, a rapid exchange of ideas, warnings, and contingencies. Each suggestion, each counterpoint, strengthened my resolve, helping me envision not just the mechanics of the plan, but the psychological impact on my family when the time came. I felt the camaraderie of allies who understood the stakes and shared my ambition. It was empowering in a way I hadn't anticipated. As our meeting ended, I packed the documents carefully and walked out, the weight of anticipation pressing against me. Their expertise had given me direction, clarity, and validation. I could almost see the scene forming in my mind, the subtle shifts, the reactions, the eventual public payoff. Every step I took from that moment forward would bring me closer to asserting control and finally claiming the recognition that had always been denied. The days that followed were a careful dance, each step calculated to position me where it would matter most. I arrived at family events with measured confidence, smiling politely while observing reactions, noting alliances and weaknesses. Every casual remark I made, every subtle correction in conversation, was part of a larger strategy, an invisible thread I was weaving toward the moment when the tables would turn. My brother still carried his smugness like armor, unaware that the armor itself would soon become a target. I imagined the exact reactions I wanted to provoke: surprise, disbelief, a flicker of fear. Each scenario played in my head repeatedly, refining my timing and delivery. Secret meetings with Lara and Nathan became my sanctuary, a space where ideas could be tested, weaknesses identified, and contingencies planned. We plotted the sequence of revelations, from small public hints of my newfound influence to the ultimate, unavoidable confrontation that would leave the family gasping. Every suggestion, every tweak to the plan, elevated the tension, making each day a test of patience and restraint. I learned to speak casually about decisions I now controlled, dropping hints that suggested competence and authority without exposing the full extent of my leverage. I walked the halls of the estate with a new awareness, noticing who listened, who deferred, who underestimated me. Even the smallest gestures, holding a legal brief with quiet authority, arranging seating at family dinners, subtly redirecting conversations, were tiny manipulations that accumulated into a powerful undercurrent. I could feel the shift beginning, the subtle recognition that I was no longer invisible, that my presence carried weight. At night, I replayed scenarios in my mind, imagining my brother's smug grin faltering. My parents carefully maintained composure, cracking under the impact of what I had planned. The suspense coiled tightly inside me, a mix of exhilaration and anxiety, each day amplifying the psychological tension. I knew the family was unaware of the storm building around them, and that ignorance made the eventual reveal all the more potent. By the end of one late afternoon, standing in the quiet of the study with the sun casting long shadows across the floor, I felt the culmination of planning and patience coalesce. Every move, every word, every silent observation had led to this moment, and I could sense the imminent shift in power. The public shock, the dramatic reversal I envisioned, was almost within reach. I allowed myself a small, grim smile, imagining the reactions, the disbelief, the awe, and knew that when the time came, nothing would be the same. The day had finally arrived. I walked into the grand hall of the family estate, the chandeliers casting a warm glow over familiar faces, all of them unaware of the storm that was about to descend. My brother, as usual, carried himself with that smug, self-satisfied air, the Tesla keys and mansion talk still fresh in everyone's minds. I felt the familiar surge of anger, but it was tempered now by a cold, calculated control. This wasn't about him anymore. It was about justice, about flipping decades of neglect and favoritism into a moment that would be remembered. I waited patiently for the gathering to settle, listening to the chatter, the clinking of glasses, the idle congratulations that had always excluded me. Then, with subtle authority, I stood, letting my presence demand attention. Silence began to ripple across the room. My parents glanced at each other nervously, sensing something different in my demeanor. I cleared my throat, letting the tension build, and slowly began. There are a few things about our family finances and business that perhaps haven't been clear to everyone, I said, voice calm but resolute. Heads turned, murmurs began, and my brother's smirk faltered ever so slightly. I revealed the documents I had carefully preserved, hidden financial accounts, previously undisclosed shares in family enterprises, and legal leverage that placed me in a position of authority they had never anticipated. I watched the color drain from my brother's face as each revelation landed piece by piece. It seems that while some of us were busy being celebrated for simply existing, others were quietly entrusted with responsibilities and resources that have been overlooked, I continued, my voice carrying just enough bite to cut through the room. Every gasp, every widening eye, felt like a balm to years of humiliation, each reaction a confirmation that the tide had shifted. I paused to let the shock settle, watching as my parents struggled to maintain composure. The accountant, present for moral and procedural support, nodded subtly in my direction, validating every point I made. The room was tense, the air thick with disbelief. Then I delivered the coup de grace. The hidden shares and inheritance were mine to influence, mine to assert, and I would be exercising that authority immediately. The realization hit hard. My brother, who had strutted for years as the favored child, now faced the undeniable fact that the power dynamic had irreversibly changed. The reactions were immediate and visceral. My brother's face turned red, a mixture of anger, embarrassment, and disbelief. My parents exchanged awkward glances, their carefully constructed hierarchy crumbling under the weight of truth. Murmurs of astonishment rippled through the assembled friends and relatives. I could see the combination of shock and respect beginning to settle over the room, a karmic satisfaction that made my chest tighten with a strange, triumphant joy. For the first time in decades, I felt fully seen, fully acknowledged. I had taken the quiet resentment, the years of invisibility, and transformed it into tangible, undeniable authority. I didn't need to shout, didn't need to lash out. My presence, my knowledge, and my calculated revelations spoke volumes. The room shifted subtly, almost imperceptibly, but in that moment, I knew I had succeeded. Not through cruelty, not through aggression, but through strategic patience, foresight, and the quiet accumulation of power that they had never noticed until it was too late. As I stepped back, letting the weight of the revelation sink in, I felt a strange mixture of relief, vindication, and moral triumph. This wasn't just a financial victory. It was an assertion of worth, a reclamation of dignity, and a reminder that the overlooked can rise with quiet authority. My brother slumped, his arrogance dismantled, and the room seemed to shift in my favor. I realized that justice wasn't always loud, but when delivered with precision and patience, it resonated louder than any shouting could ever achieve. Today, the scales had been balanced, and I stood at the center, finally recognized, finally empowered, finally victorious. The room was heavy with stunned silence, broken only by the soft murmurs of disbelief. My parents' faces were pale, a mixture of shock and something that resembled regret, though I knew better than to expect a full acknowledgement of their past neglect. My brother sat frozen, his previous arrogance evaporated, replaced by confusion and humiliation. It was almost surreal to watch them process the truth, their carefully maintained facade crumbling under the weight of what I had revealed. Every gasp, every hesitant glance, every whispered question felt like a small victory, a testament to the years I had been ignored. I sank into a chair, allowing myself a moment to breathe and observe. The initial rush of triumph still pulsed in my chest, sharp and invigorating, but it was tempered by a profound awareness of the moral weight I carried. I had wielded power carefully, deliberately, without malice, yet the impact was undeniable. Their shock and discomfort were the natural consequences of years of inequity, of favoritism and neglect, and I had simply exposed what had always existed. I felt a strange mixture of relief and gravity, knowing that I had delivered justice while maintaining my integrity. My mind wandered to the long history behind this moment. The countless times my accomplishments were ignored, the birthdays overlooked, the sacrifices unseen. Each memory now felt vindicated, validated by the undeniable shift in the family dynamic. And yet, I also recognized that victory carried responsibility. I was no longer invisible, and my actions had consequences far beyond my own satisfaction. I needed to navigate the aftermath carefully, balancing assertion with fairness, ensuring that my newfound authority did not breed bitterness or recklessness. As conversation slowly resumed around me, tentative and subdued, I realized how profoundly the family had underestimated me. The respect I had been denied for so long was finally there, quiet but unmistakable. The room seemed smaller now, the dynamics reshaped by what had occurred, and I felt a calm sense of empowerment settle over me. The knowledge that I had acted decisively, with intelligence and patience, reinforced a deep confidence I had never felt before. For the first time, I could reflect without anger consuming me. I allowed myself to savor the moment. The subtle nods of acknowledgement, the cautious apologies, the dawning realization that I had always been capable, always deserving, and now finally recognized. Relief washed over me, a gentle release from the tension that had defined my life in that household for decades. I understood that this was more than a personal victory. It was a statement, a lesson, and a turning point that could not be ignored. And as I sat quietly, letting the room absorb the shift, I felt a rare clarity. Empowerment and justice had been achieved, but the true satisfaction lay in the knowledge that I had acted with intention, intelligence, and restraint. The family had seen me finally, and the emotional scales had been balanced in a way that was both undeniable and lasting. In that moment, I allowed myself to breathe fully, to process the magnitude of what had occurred, and to feel the profound relief of finally being both heard and acknowledged. Days later, I found myself alone in the study. The documents that had once held the promise of upheaval, now neatly filed and organized. The house was quiet, the hum of activity reduced to a distant murmur, and I finally allowed myself to reflect on the journey that had brought me here. The initial thrill of revelation and confrontation had faded into a steady, grounding awareness. I had reclaimed my power, asserted my worth, and most importantly, done so without compromising my dignity. The air felt lighter, as if the very walls acknowledged the shift that had occurred within me. I thought about my brother, still recovering from the shock of the truth, and my parents, who now bore the quiet weight of regret and awareness. Their reactions had been inevitable, and while some of them would struggle to accept the new balance, I understood that I could no longer rely on their validation, or need it. My life was my own, shaped not by their favoritism or neglect, but by the choices I had made with intention, patience, and courage. The empowerment I felt was quiet, internal, and infinitely more satisfying than any public applause. Memories of the years I had spent invisible, dismissed, and overlooked surfaced, but instead of anger they brought clarity. I recognized the resilience I had cultivated, the patience I had endured, and the intelligence I had honed to navigate a world that had underestimated me at every turn. The bitterness that had once simmered inside me had transformed into a calm confidence, a sense of self-worth untethered from external approval. I had finally stepped into a life where I could assert myself without fear or hesitation. As I gazed out the window at the quiet estate grounds, I felt a bittersweet undertone threading through the victory. The family dynamics had changed irreversibly. Some relationships would remain strained, some bonds permanently altered. Yet, that reality did not diminish the justice I had achieved. If anything, it underscored the cost of growth and the importance of independence. I had learned that empowerment often comes not from revenge alone, but from the quiet assertion of boundaries and self-recognition. I allowed myself a small, reflective smile, acknowledging both the triumph and the sacrifices that had paved the way. The story of neglect, favoritism, and hidden injustice had reached its conclusion, but the lesson endured. I was capable, worthy, and resilient. And though the family might never fully see me as an equal, I no longer needed their approval to define my value. I had claimed my space in the world with intelligence, patience, and dignity, and that knowledge was unassailable. As the sunlight shifted across the room, casting gentle shadows, I felt a profound sense of completion. Justice had been served, growth had been achieved, and a quiet power now coursed through me, steady and unwavering. The future was mine to shape, unbound by the limitations of the past. And I knew that whatever came next, I would face it with clarity, courage, and self-assured grace. The family's world had shifted, but my own world was finally aligned. I was seen. I was strong. I was free.